microorganism where even under unfavorable conditions also some microorganisms can grow. So what are those unfavorable conditions and what those microorganisms can be termed? Now when you take, no, not amoeba, Ronak. When you take unfavorable conditions, I am giving extreme temperatures first foremost example. Okay. Yeah, I'll explain Arya that. Now when you take extreme temperatures, it could be very low temperature. It could be very high temperature. Isn't it? Very low temperature, we can go for -°C. -degree. Very high temperature, we can go for 212°C. Even at these extreme conditions, some microorganisms can survive. The microorganisms which can survive at low temperature are called psychrophiles. Psychrophiles. Psychro stands for very cold temperature. Very cold temperature. Then when you go for the microorganisms which grow at very high temperature, those are called thermophiles. Thermo, extreme high temperature. Stands for extreme high temperature. So here, extreme low and extreme high temperature microorganisms can survive. How? That's a question someone asked. Is it Arya? Yeah. Because of the presence of a mechanism called heat shock proteins. Some back-end virus carries this shock proteins. Okay. The term is enough for you to understand at this point. Concentrate on the term psychrophile, thermophile. That's the first at this point. Okay. So even at unfavorable conditions of extreme temperatures, some microorganisms can survive. I have a slide about the extreme temperatures. Yeah, here. Since in itself in West Bengal we are having a hot spring. If anyone visited West Bengal or someone from West Bengal area, something like that, they might be knowing this hot spring. You would have heard about, you visited area? Oh, fine. Even the Yellowstone National Park. Have you heard of Yellowstone National Park? Not in India, US. Yeah. Yellowstone National Park, where you will find, yes, whether you know? Okay, fine, that's good. Yellowstone National Park, you will find a lake with hot water 365 days. Yeah, yes, actually under the Yellowstone National Park, there used to be a volcanic eruption happens even then. But still there is a lake in Yellowstone National Park with hot bubble water over there. Yes, magma and all. Yeah, that's all related to. So here, what our interest is, we are having so many hot springs where the thermophile, that's the word thermophile. Thermophile are the microorganisms which will grow at very extreme temperatures are the one which are there we find in hot springs. Okay, the hot spring we in India is in West Bengal. That's just a small point over here. Other than that, nothing much more importance on this slide. Just for the word I gave this slide, thermophile. Then I just want to explain how microorganisms can grow in anaerobic environment. So anaerobic means what? You will not have much oxygen levels for the microorganisms to survive. What's that area? Microorganisms to become radioactive. By themselves, they cannot become radioactive. Even though if you try to grow the microorganisms in uranium and plutonium material medium also, they cannot grow. But microorganisms can be made radioactive. there's a science related to geology where the microorganisms can be made radioactive by tagging the microorganisms artificially with radioactive elements. That comes if you take how anaerobic microorganisms will survive. For that purpose, I'm showing this slide. See, anaerobic is absence of oxygen. Without oxygen, most of the living organisms cannot live and grow, including microorganisms, because they are also living organisms. But even under anaerobic conditions, even in absence of oxygen, microorganisms can survive. Best example is a wound made in our body or on an animal body. Best example how anaerobic organisms can grow. See, on a wound, if you take the microorganism, for example, here I'm taking an example of small example, bacteria, on type of microorganism. For that sake, here in this example, got a wound on hand or some leg part, and you didn't wash it thoroughly after you got the wound, okay, and you didn't took any medication after you got wounded, and that was a deep wound. What happens in such case? In such case, the wound will be infected with microorganism, and the microorganism starts its life in the form of spores. Spores are nothing but the minute structures which you will observe on a wounded part. Those are the vegetative cells, which they will not go for reproduction. Then these spores will go for destructing the tissue by eating upon the tissue of dead part, which we call as necrosis. Okay, and then from there it will go in depth into the wound, and it will take utilization of carbohydrates, go for releasing different gases. That's why if the wound gets infected, you get a foul smell, kind of smell which is because of the tissue destruction, and kind of gases will be released from there, which gives the foul smell at the deep cut wound if not treated properly. And at around the wounded tissue, the microorganisms get accumulated in groups. They start dividing. Even the oxygen is absent, they went into the depth of the wound, and the whole necrosis process, what it will do, necrosis is nothing but tissue destruction. It will cut the flow of blood to the wounded part. So ultimately what happens, where the wounded part was not treated in a proper way, when this stage reaches, we have to go for amputation. Amputation is nothing but removal of that part. This is how microorganisms can successfully grow on an anaerobic environment. Best example, deep wound. They started as spores, minute structures on the superficial side of the wound, and the wound was not treated properly. Wound was not washed, not taken care properly, not given proper medication. Then all these stages may happen, and ultimately it may result in increase of tissue destruction and cut off blood supply to the wounded part, and ultimately the whole part where the wound happened has to be removed, what we call amputation. So this is an example where the microorganisms can grow in unfavorable conditions also.